your finger. All right.
Hello, hello. I'm Roahn Hylton. I am a SONA board member and creator advocate. Thank you for joining us for this edition of our In the Room series. Um, to tell a little bit about myself, if you don't know, I'm a producer composer, mostly known for my work on Nicki Minaj Super Bass, most recently The Wonder Years on ABC, and Bel Air on NBC Peacock, amongst other things. And because we don't have a moderator, we are here introducing ourselves, but I would love for you guys to meet an incredible, brilliant mind that I've had the pleasure of getting to know recently, and who will also be here with our In the Room series, Stephen Bray. And I'm excited to talk to you, and instead of me reading your bio, I'd love you to give your honors and introduce yourself before we get into this conversation. Tell us about you and your journey with music.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here. And well, I'm like to think of myself as a drummer first. It's the one thing I will play in front of anybody else. And I started, as I say, as a drummer and realized that I really wanted to learn how to make music that's on the radio. And I'm going way back because I'm a little bit older than you. And so back when I had my dreams about making music that's on the radio, there were no schools that you could, there's no production track you could take at Berkeley or at Clive Davis or at I think Full Sail was one of the early schools. So I just kind of figured out how to get into songwriting and musicianship good enough to get into the studio and become a producer, because that's, I looked at albums. This is back again in the days when we looked at albums and looked at the back and saw who was doing what. And I saw the word producer, and I thought, oh, well, that's what I want to do. It's the biggest word on the back of the album. So that sounds like a good, good job. So the only way to really to get that job that I could see at the time was to get into the studio and figure out how things happen. And so that path led to writing, because you need a song to go into the studio with. And that led to, sort of cajoling the members of various top 40 bands that I was in to writing our own music and saying, let's not only play Van Halen. And we were playing Boz Scaggs and Van Halen and Donna Summer. Let's write our own songs, go into the studio. And that's really how my path to being a producer, laid out.
Man, it's so interesting because I've been talking to a lot of young up and coming producers, and the questions that they have for me is, how did you get in? The same kind of questions, right? I don't think those questions change, but their questions are, how did you get in? How did you stay in? And so a question I would like to ask you is, when you were starting, was it more specialized? Was it okay for you to just be a drummer, or did you have to pick up the skill set of a songwriter as well to stay in the rooms? Or was it good enough just to be the best at being a drummer?
At the time, drumming would have been enough if the goal was just to get in the room, figure out, what is this process? Who does what? What does the engineer do? What does the producer do? What are the assistants doing? What is an arranger? What is what are the session players? How's the language work in the studio? Because that's really important, obviously, to people getting into this world, is like, how do people talk about music as it's being created? Right. I know I see a lot of people who come into the room and they don't really know how to say or articulate the things that they're probably hearing, beautifully in their minds, but you have to be able to learn the lingo. So it wasn't strictly necessary for me to branch out, but I did pick up a guitar, piano and guitar, just enough to be able to say, this is a G minor 7.
Right.
And I know what that is. I know how that sounds different than a G major 7. And I know that, eventually I started picking up things like, a G chord is the dominant chord in the key of C. And so that it spread to songwriting, and which made it easier to get into the studio, because if you have original material, you have something to track. I didn't really know about, I mean, I guess I didn't understand that I could have just done covers, but it seemed somehow instinctively like a good idea to write songs.
Hmm. So it wasn't about necessarily getting the skill set just because you wanted to have the skill set. It was a necessary skill set to be able to achieve your goal, which is to write a song.
Well, I should admit that I can confess that two of my big influences, very early on, in, like, I'm talking the 70s, early 70s, Todd Rundgren, who is a musical hero of mine. I noticed that he was playing everything on the album. And Stevie Wonder, both. Stevie was another one. Stevie,
Everything.
Todd, um, uh, both, you look at the album and it'd say all instruments played by. And so that did kind of say to me, well, if you really want to get your vision realized, learn how to at least noodle your way through the parts so you can show a real guitarist what you think, the guitar part might be like. So that kind of, contradicts what I said earlier. I don't think it was necessary, but it was inspiring to see that, Stevie, like on, I think, Supervision, he's playing the Superstition, he's playing the drums, like obviously all the keyboards, the bass part, it's crazy. Boogie on Reggae Woman, just all those keyboard parts he's playing are insane. So that was a real inspiration. Not that I ever achieved that level of skill, but it did help me get demos, of the songs done.
Yeah, and I'm seeing so many similarities in the context now, right? That as a creator, you need to diversify yourself, one, to be able to survive financially, right? But also to be able to cut through all the noise, right? Like if you want to be able to deliver the type of record that you want to be able to deliver, you need to know what the other pieces are. But it's so much more collaborative now, right? Like you'll see on a hit record, you'll have 8 people, who are part of it. And it's not because all 8 of those people aren't specialized. It's because now to be able to fulfill the dynamics of the music business, right? To get it heard in all the places it needs to be heard, you need a chain, right? You
Right,
need.
right.
I have a funny saying. It takes a village to raise a hit record, right? And, and so I think in that comparison or in that contrast, how would you say it became easy or difficult for you to collaborate as you were coming up? Was it easy for you to collaborate, or was it a difficult thing? How did collaboration, kind of get you where you needed to be?
Well, I want to answer that, but I also want to say that what you described a moment ago is very new. Like the fact that there are 7 or 8 people often on a title.
Right.
That's, like you say, that's the new music business. In the old days, it was one person or maybe 2 or maybe 3. But to speak to your question about collaboration, I like to think that I've, like, if you go back to kindergarten, when the teacher writes on your notes to send home to your parents, plays well with others, I'd like to say that I was in that category. And I think I've always been able to, I think I'm naturally a good listener. I will try to hear what you're saying, and I will respect what you're saying, which I think is the most important part of collaboration, is like respect what the people in the room are saying, listen carefully to what they're saying, and then try your, give it your best shot at, like, helping them realize whatever it is they're trying to express at that moment, or realize as an artist. And I think I've just got a knack for that, and it really helps in the room. And I think that led to me being comfortable, in a room with different kinds of people, or different skill sets, because, as I'm sure it's like rule number one is you need safe space.
Yes. Well, I gotta ask. One of your most notable collaborators. I'll let you tell the stories, but about how you met Madonna, how that started, how your collaborative process grew, and how you learned about yourself within that collaboration, and how it informed your later collaborations.
You might have to ask me some of those questions
Again,
on the
it
road,
was a lot
because
of questions.
I have a very short working memory. It's like I heard the first thing you asked me.
Well, how did the collaboration start?
Right.
And what did you learn about yourself in collaborating, right? And then also, how did it inform your other collaborations later?
Right. Well, we were friends first. So I met Madonna in 1977 in Michigan, in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where I was living and was trying to be a jazz drummer at the time, but also playing in a lot of pop bands around town, like in a top 40 band. Um, and I keep coming back to that. And I should mention that playing in the top 40, like I didn't go to music school, but I played in a million top 40 bands.
Hmm.
And that was how I learned what, and for people that are too young to know, top 40 refers to when we used to live by the chart. The top 40 was the Billboard, the sort of arbiter of what was working on the radio and in sales. So most musicians made money that way, and that's a really great way to learn, like, why does this song work, and how because you basically have to reverse engineer a
Right.
hit song to play those top 40 songs. Like, what is the guitar doing, what's the bass doing, what are the drums doing? So 77, that's what I'm doing in Ann Arbor, Michigan, playing in a lot of bands like that, but also in a band that played only originals. We were called The Cost of Living. And these two songwriters that came out of Motown, because Ann Arbor's right outside of Detroit, where I grew up. And Gary Fears and Dennis Jackson were the songwriters in The Cost of Living. And that was really inspirational to me because they had written, everything that we played. And I thought, oh, wow, this is impressive. And Madonna used to come to our gigs. She'd come to our gigs and dance like crazy, and everybody would be like, okay, back away from the dance floor. She's clearly the most dynamic person in the room. Let's watch her. So along with everybody else, I noticed her and I thought, this is somebody I kind of want to meet because she's just super, super dynamic. And she, at the time, she wasn't making music. She was studying dance at U of M in Ann Arbor there. She moved to New York. And when I was ready to move to New York about a year or so later, I called and said, hey, can you introduce me to some players? Because I'm coming. I'm not going to have a penny. I'm going to have nothing. And so hopefully you can help introduce me to some players, help me find work as a drummer. It turned out that somehow in the interim, between her leaving Ann Arbor and that moment of me calling, she had started to write songs and was playing drums in a band. And well, she actually was playing drums in Breakfast Club, a band called Breakfast Club that I eventually joined. But she had been learning to play guitar. And as I say, she had like a set of 14 songs when I got there. And she said, by the way, I need a drummer. So wow. That began our sort of musical friendship. And when I got there, I was crazily impressed with the songwriting and kind of dove in as I became, I think, the quasi arranger, because I don't think anybody in the group at the moment really knew what I was talking about earlier in terms of, oh, if you want this song to be successful, what does the arrangement need to sound like? So I started doing that, and that was the beginning of our creative relationship. Parallel to this, I've always been a fan of dance music, and going back to my days in Detroit, I consider Motown a really beautiful hybrid of pop and dance music, because you can groove to it, right? You can really, most of those Motown songs will get you on the dance floor, and yet they're really poppy and hooky and all the good stuff. So I'm working on my songs. We're working on the songs that Madonna has written, and I'm working on some what I would call my sort of dance song demos. I tried to sing them, and the results were iffy, let's say. And let's just say that my mother was very appreciative of it, but nobody was as enthusiastic as my mom. Mom's ears are always loving. So I said, Madonna, will you sing this one? Because, I think you would sound great on it. And that was the first time we co-wrote.
Wow.
Well, actually, the very first song she came in and sang for me, but after that, it was like, oh, that sounds really good. We should write together in this idiom, because her songs, if you listen to her early demos, they're like, The Pretenders comes to mind.
Right.
Even bands like the Byrds, like Roger McGuinn and the Byrds. It's very kind of folk rock, and or slightly punky. But my stuff was, like I say, born out of, like, I was a big fan of the Motown, and then I remember Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, being like a big, the grooves of those kinds of things. Off the Wall, was huge at the time, because I think Off the Wall is what, 78, something like that, 77. But Quincy Jones records, the Brothers Johnson was huge for me. So I was writing rhythmic stuff like that, and her voice on that was just really effective. She got signed on the basis of one of those songs that we did on this 4-song cassette, and then that led to the next 10 years.
There's two things I want to say. The first thing is the overlap in technology, right? So the very first thing that I ever did, I was a wannabe rapper, right? But I didn't have access to a studio. So what I had to do was get a actual boombox, record myself on one, dub it to the next one, and then I had, my overdubs on one. But to see, even with our difference in age, how we could still connect on cassettes, but then, well, not even 10 years later, we're in whole new mediums. I just thought that's like an extraordinary part of what it takes to be creative in this business, is being able to go through all the technology. But I'm getting a little nudge, because I got to ask you one thing. I want you to tell me what comes up for you with that. But at the same time, what do I know you transitioned from this incredible collaborative experience there, writing and recording and producing, but then you transitioned into musicals and scoring films. And same thing for me. My journey starts as a producer, and I find that larger format storytelling is more conducive to my creativity, right? I get to do more, right? And so I would love to know for you, what are the difference between
Right.
writing a musical and scoring a film? And then we could come back, because I know there's a whole large gap. There's a whole
Well,
more to talk about.
I get the feeling that you're as nerdy as I am when it comes to the technology. And when you said cassette to cassette, I mean, that just took me back to the sound of the hiss
Oh
when
man.
you go from dub from one cassette to another, and you're trying to get another track. It's just
But Steven, remember that we spent all this money in between there trying to have studios that remove that hiss, right? Millions of dollar studios, and now they have hiss emulators.
that's right. Oh yeah, I
Thermal.
need that $1,000 plugin that will make the hiss, just sound just right.
What you doing?
But yeah, well, I don't have the. I get the feeling you were trained to be a composer, a serious composer, right?
I mean, yes or no? Yes and no. I studied at the conservatory, but like I learned all the orchestration and certain things later, right? I
Right.
learned by necessity. I wasn't that wasn't my career arc originally.
Did you
Um,
formally study orchestration?
yes, but
Right.
like not at the university. I had to go study, like on my own. You know what I'm saying? And then with my partner, and then we have orchestrators who do it. Um,
Right.
but I won't say that that's my forte, right? My forte is melody. When it all
Got you.
comes down to it, melody, and we'll have somebody else come in and make the greatness out of the melodic components.
So to answer your question, I don't have that kind of training. When my introduction to larger format composing, I hesitate to even use the word composing, because how I came into, I mean, I've always been a big fan of film music, but I never, it's always been a mystery to me, how people like you do what you do. My introduction to it was through the film, the much lauded Who's That Girl, in I think it was 1985 or something like that. And Madonna and James Foley, who was the director, came to me and said, "We want the score to this to be like house music, or we want the score to this film to be just the sort of bouncy, dancy thing that keeps the energy going." And even though it was, the concept of the movie is basically bringing a baby from the 40s, they wanted this sort of 80s sound. So that's why, for me, my approach to that was, I just had to instinctively figure out that, okay, well, it's a movie, and I understand that there are themes in movies that, basically stretch over an hour and a half period that, show up in different ways.
Yep.
So but I did a very pop version. I call it pop, rhythmic version of that. Like I wasn't really, I don't think that, I don't think I had the understanding that you're talking about of like constructing a melody that becomes an overarching theme that you will then extrapolate on or
No, 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 no.
you know what I mean?
No, no, I'm talking about what you're talking about. I'm talking about melody that the listener is going to sing back. You know what I
Mm-hmm,
mean?
mm-hmm.
Then those thematic melody, like sometimes they're one for one, but I often find that a melody or excuse me, a theme, a melodic theme needs to run longer than a theme that would work for a pop song, especially a now pop song. Maybe early 90s, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Those melodies would run longer with changes and chords, but pop nowadays, we're in and out really fast. So those melodies, I won't say are one to one often. I will
Right.
have to stretch those out to create a theme. But that's more what I meant. I meant more what you were talking about, melody. Like I'm singing a melody to write a song, right? That's more what I mean. That is my forte.
Gotcha.
And
Gotcha.
extrapolating score from that, I would say is what was kind of my unique niche. Sorry.
Right. Right. Well, that, to the other part of the question you asked, the pop, being successful in the pop world led me to Allie Willis, who is, as we lost her a couple of years ago, but um, she is, September is probably her best known song that she wrote with Maurice and for Earth, Wind and Fire and Al McKay, I think. And I met Allie because she was such a Renaissance woman. She was also the art director for a music video that my band Breakfast Club did. And this was in 1986 or 87, I think. And my first meeting with Allie was as, the person who basically created this crazy world for a music video that Breakfast Club made. And I thought at the time, this is because I'm good that way. I'm like, when I saw Madonna on the dance floor, I'm like, I'm going to meet that person. And Allie met her on the set of this video, and I thought, this is a dynamic person. This is a super dynamic person. I'm going to stay in touch with this person. And we stayed friends. And from 87 until 2000, so 13 years later, Allie says, I just got a call from my friend Scott Sanders. He's producing The Color Purple, and they're looking for, he asked me to, recommend people, to take a stab at writing the songs. Scott wisely said, well, I can't have a white team writing The Color Purple. It just doesn't add up. Let's not do that. But Allie wisely said, well, but wait a minute, I've got two Black friends that are musicians, and we're already working on stuff. Because what happened was Allie had called me to help her with some thematic material she was working on. She also called Brenda Russell at the same time. And Allie, being the wizard that she is, said, maybe the three of us should write together, because I think we'll move really fast if the three of us are in the same room working together. So the three of us are basically playing, and I say playing because we weren't getting paid, helping Allie with these animated projects that she was needed music for. Brenda, in her wisdom, who is another super dynamic person who I worship the ground she walks on. Brenda says, wow, this is good. This is good. This feels really great. The three of us working together. We just need something bigger now. And like the next day, or, in our minds, the next day, Scott Sanders called and said, I'm looking for writers for The Color Purple. Allie pitched the three of us, and we basically auditioned by writing a couple of songs. And that led to, us really having to think about what you're talking about in terms of let's come up with a melody that's going to come and go throughout this whole show. And that is, and interestingly enough, one of the first themes we wrote is one of the one things that survived to this day. It's like it starts I'm here, which is the 11 o'clock number from the show. And in our mind, it was going to show up everywhere. And well, on stage, it does. If you see the stage version of the show, it's that the melody that begins I'm here basically is also the melody that begins the Suge Avery song and several other places. But we learned all that, on the job training. Like, let's just tell Scott we can do this
Right.
and then go and then run, figure out how to do
Yep. Build a plane on the way down.
it. Right. So I don't did I cover your questions? I know you asked about three.
Listen, listen. We're just in the room. What you
Okay,
mean?
good. In the room.
I think you hinted on something where you spoke to something um about that process, right? And about getting hired for the process and how the filmmaker was like, hey, I can't make The Color Purple and not have any, black people creating
Right.
in this. It is Black History Month, you know what I'm saying? And so, but I do want to ask you, what would you say is Black music? And like, what is Black art? And I want to reference this from this recent movie. It will probably date this when you're watching this on YouTube later. But the movie is American Fiction. It is currently 2024, and the movie is nominated for an Oscar. Incredible performances by Jeffrey Wright, and many others. So
Sterling K. Brown.
Sterling K. Brown also nominated. But what's phenomenal, Cord Jefferson, for screenplay, I think, or direct.
Yes.
I'm not sure. But
Maybe both.
yeah, but what's amazing about this film is what it says. I won't ruin it. Hopefully by now you've seen it. But one of the themes, no pun intended, of this movie is like, what is Black art? And the protagonist basically says, it's Black art because I'm Black as a creator. But
Right.
the business of art, right, in this particular movie wasn't necessarily marketing his Black art, as he would call it, to Black people. And Black art would tend to be more stereotypical, and that's kind of the conversation that this movie is posing. But I want to ask you the same thing: is what is Black art, right, and what is Black music, right? And as an entertainer who spanned generations creating, in both pop, and rhythmic, as they say, with the quotes, intentionally. What does that mean to be Black in these experiences, and what has it meant for you?
Well, it's a tricky question. I think it was James Baldwin that said that art transcends, barriers like race,
Mm-hmm.
and he was, he kind of rejected the idea that art can have a color or a boundary like that. And so I think, he thought that it's more about the experience. Like art has to do with the experience of the artist. And if you are a person of color, your art is going to reflect your experience. But I think there's such a spectrum of experience for people of color, right? It's like my experience, I don't know how Jimi Hendrix grew up, but he played guitar with I think maybe the Isley Brothers or maybe with Curtis Mayfield. He played in some what you would call R&B Black music, settings, but that wasn't what he was feeling, obviously, right? Jimmy needed to answer the call of rock music that was clearly, rock and blues was calling him, and he said, maybe I'm supposed to make maybe some people believe I'm supposed to be the guitar player in the Isley Brothers, but I'm not going to be able to do that. I've got to break out. So for me, I think it has to do, with your own personal experience. It's like I grew up in Detroit, which was, a very at the time in I grew up in the 50s, 60s, so 60s, 70s. My sort of, I like to think that the music that you hear when you're somewhere between 10 and 14 is the music that's going to stay with you for the rest of your life. And so
Interesting.
for me, that would have been 66 through 70. And so I was hearing Hendrix, I was hearing Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, I was hearing Aretha Franklin, I was hearing Bill Withers, I was hearing them, but the Black music, well, it's hard to say because the Black music coming out of Motown, it's arguably not that Black, right? It's like it's it's a very, very, very listenable in a pop music, what they used to call pop music kind of way. Like we had three major radio stations in Detroit that I remember. There was WJLB that played black music. WCHD played black music. I mean, like they played the Four Tops. They played like well, we're splitting hairs, but they played the Four Tops, which is arguably very poppy music, right? But it's clearly black by the way the delivery of the vocals and everything. Then there was Keener 13, which played like the Carpenters and the Osmonds and all the sort of Herman's Hermits and all the British invasion stuff. And I liked it all. And so for me, Motown was the closest thing that kind of like combined these things. And then there was CKLW, which is the third station. They played both. Mm-hmm. And so I'm trying to answer your question, but it's difficult because I think Donald Glover, Alicia Keys, Corinne Bailey Rae, those are three people of color that in very different, wildly different expressions of Esperanza Spalding. It's like, I think it depends upon how you were brought up and what your environment was. Like, the color of your skin and what kind of music you make. I don't think the formula is based on what you look like. It's based on what your experience was. And for me, that experience was a little weird because my parents listened to show tunes.
Right.
And they listened to Camelot and The King and I and Fiddler on the Roof. And there was not Miles Davis playing in my house when I grew up. And then my older brother, whose record collection I basically stole when he moved out of the house, was listening to Rod Stewart and the Rolling Stones. And so I had this bizarre, inculcation into what music was coming out of me. It was Isley Brothers. It was at the time Chicago Transit Authority, but it was also Aretha Franklin. So I respond to all this stuff. But what came out when I started making my songs and making my music was kind of based on what I could do technically, which kind of goes back to what you're talking about with training, because I couldn't execute some of the more sophisticated stuff I'm hearing that is coming out of, say, a Miles Davis, recording session. But I could listen to a Todd Rundgren song and go, oh, he's playing G minor 7 to F major 7. And that sounds pretty. And I like that. And I can do that. So my songs start coming out like that, and the chord changes that I sort of kept falling back into are those kind of changes versus the kind of virtuosity that Aretha Franklin and gospel, because the church that my parents, that I grew up in was Methodist. So we're singing very European harmony, you know what I mean? And had they taken me over to Second Baptist, where my grandmother went to church, I would probably be a very different musician, So I hope that kind of answers.
Oh, I can relate somewhat there in terms of the journey of not my mom was a very devout contemporary Christian music listener, right? I got to college and my friends had to school me on the history of 90s R&B. I was getting laughed at and joked on, so I had to study, right? But that also informed a lot of my musical decisions later, and I can relate to that. Similarly, my best friend growing up, he would always listen to Bob Dylan on our rides to high school. I hated it. No, I hated Bob Dylan.
What was it that you hated about it?
It was slow and plodding, and I didn't love his voice. I didn't understand. And at that time, I'm 15, 16, right? Bob Dylan's way, he's still old for the time that we were listening to it, right?
Right.
I was like, I want to listen to some new stuff. I was like, put on 97.9 was the hip hop and R&B station in Houston at the time. I want to listen to UGK, which is a famous rap group, Pimp C and Bun B. That's who I wanted to listen to. But listening to this, it's his car. He was like, hey, bro, get you some culture in your life.
Right.
And to be honest with you, listening to obviously one of the greatest songwriters of all time and learning something new lyrically very much informed what my songwriting process would be later. And so you definitely answered it. I think the conversation really comes to be more about commerce, right? Like Black music and music defined by genres, often how we can sell it to a demographic, not necessarily what those people are creating, right? because just because you're playing a C major chord doesn't mean it's a pop song.
Right.
Or just because you're playing all the black keys, you know, with a little soul in it doesn't make it a
Right.
gospel song, right? I think there's so many things and nuances in what makes black music and black art. But I think as you get into larger form storytelling, specifically when you have to use themes to tell a story, those themes and those stories are rooted in experience. And those experiences are very definitely close to where you're from, often how you look like, and what those experiences are. And so I'm always curious to know, you know, from other creatives what they think about what that really means. And especially as we see Beyonce with the number one record right now, that's a country song. Shout out, Killer B, colleague of mine who produced that.
Right.
Very, very, very proud to see that. And there's a huge uproar in places about it. Should artists be able to, not just because Beyonce's black, but should artists be able to jump genre when it happens all the time, you know, whatever.
Well, and also depends on which way that crossing over happens, right? Because back in the day, people got upset at Daryl Hall and John Oates because they were taking slots on the black charts. But you can't argue with She's Gone, and you can't argue with, what was the other one? There was I Can't Go For That, I think maybe was on the black charts, and people were saying you're taking space away, which is true.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, I mean, I never liked the boundary. I used to work in record stores. That was how I made money growing, when I was like trying to make a career. I always objected to the fact that you had these labels, because it's just music,
Right.
And so, but I understand, like you say, the commerce of it is, you need to, if we didn't have the Image Awards, for instance,
Right.
There was a lot of artists that would not get recognized.
But there's a huge conversation. Also, I happen to be on the voting committee of this, and I was asked, not within the voting committee, but outside, are you going to vote for the nominees that aren't black, right? And
Right.
what does that say? And it's a very interesting conversation. And one that we can't get into huge discussions about this with our short amount of time.
Right.
But I find it very fascinating, even to the point that you're making with Hall and Oates, and now obviously Beyonce, and there's a big controversy specifically around country with Lil Nas X, how
Right.
radio stations wouldn't play the song; they would only play Billy Ray Cyrus's part of the song. Right.
I mean, that's just racism.
Right.
That's just plain racism.
However, I think these genre lines and these demographic lines are getting blurred even more as people are returning to music that you can touch, feel, and have experiential moments with, right? And we've gone through a long phase of playlist inspired music, right? Where the music is just kind of a vibe that goes so you can get to the next song and you can get as many streams as you want. Right. But within that, I feel like that influence has made it harder to tell long form stories or to take bigger risks. So when you see Beyonce taking a risk like this, it's beautiful to me. And I think obviously it is black music. And I'll never forget when I studied at conservatory, I'll never forget this, Stephen. I'm reading one of our books. I'm thinking I'm a freshman. And the book says all American music originated as black music.
Right.
I could not believe my textbook said that.
It won't say it, by the way. Next year's version probably won't say that.
Well, that was like 20 some years ago.
Yeah.
It doesn't crack, but don't tell nobody my age. I'm of a certain age now, but it was a long time ago. And I thought it was very poignant and interesting that the author, that the editors, that the colleges acknowledge that point. And that's why I think it's important for us to say, what is actually black music? What does that even mean? And I know I feel like we can talk about this all day.
Well, you're reminding me that I only learned a couple of years ago that I think what the textbook person knew was that, Sister Rosetta Tharpe basically gave us the textbook of how to play guitar in modern and American music. Whether it's rock music or whether it was Chuck Berry, or eventually Hendrix or Eddie Van Halen, you can trace it all back to Rosetta Tharpe. And have you ever seen footage of her
I
playing guitar?
have not.
It's amazing. And
This
then
up.
the other trail of piano, of modern piano playing, leads back to another black woman named Mildred Falls, who played piano for Mahalia Jackson.
Definitely
And
know.
when you listen to her, like this, I found out this from Leon Russell. Like Leon Russell, who's one of my favorite songwriters, by the way, not black, but I defy you to say that his music doesn't sound like a black person wrote, a song for you, for instance,
Mm.
or and that Donny Hathaway sang. You would hear that song and you would think, well, Donny Hathaway probably wrote that because it just sounds like it's so soulful. But Leon Russell wrote that, and he's a pretty soulful guy.
Mm.
So the whole race, color thing it's a very wonderfully confusing thing because I
Well,
think it's healthy that we're confused by what Beyonce is doing, and I think it's healthy that Leon Russell wrote that song. I don't know where I was going with that, but um, I think I wanted to say, oh yeah, Mildred Falls was the source of Leon Russell was the source of that story. But these two black women basically created what we call American soul music, gospel music, rock music. It's all traceable back to these two black women, which I think is amazing.
and you said Rosetta Tharpe, right?
Sister Rosetta Tharpe. If you see her playing that guitar, and there's a great video of her playing guitar on a train station.
Hmm.
And so I know there's people writing stories about them. There should be musicals. There should be movies about these two women because they started it all.
Man, good stuff there. So, I want to talk a little bit about community.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, SONA is a membership-based trade organization, non-for-profit, basically standing in the gap for songwriters who are unable to legally unionize in the United States. And our focus is advocacy, education, and community. But what does songwriter advocacy mean to you, right? And what are ways in which we can build a stronger creator community, despite all the things trying to get in the way of that?
Well, that's a really great question. My wife is she produces films, and the independent film producers are in the same boat. They can't unionize.
Yes.
And the rules around that go back to a time when they said, well, you can't because you're managers. And I think songwriters have fallen into some other weird crack where it doesn't make sense that we can't be unionized. And I think the advocacy, well, for me, what I love most about SONA is education, is because I spend a lot of time trying to sort out all the little melodies in my head, and I don't spend enough time understanding the minutia of what SONA is trying to do. Like in the work that SONA does in Washington blows me away.
Right.
And not only that, well, I'm just so I'm just so impressed with Michelle and Adam and Shelley and people that have the capacity to be creative and be on the front lines, like working to get us paid.
Right.
And so I really 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 appreciate that, and I want to I would suggest that people make more of an effort to be on board and be part of it, because otherwise we're going to go away as a thing, as a career
Coming.
because nobody's really checking for us but us. And it's in a way it's a parallel to the civil rights movement in a way, because like I say, if we don't do it for ourselves, no one's going to do it. There's nobody going, oh, those poor songwriters, they're getting paid like tiny little fractions. We have to, and especially with AI kind of looking over our shoulders every second, literally kind of learning from us.
Oh, well, AI is not looking over our shoulders. It's currently sitting in our lap.
it's it's in the room.
Yeah, it is true.
Yeah. So no, I think it's incredibly important for as many people, because in numbers, right? It's the numbers that kind of create attention and bring the shame that makes change. Like usually people get shamed into changing things. Like, and in this case, I suppose, and again, I'm pretending that I am as educated on this as I need to be, but
Excuse me.
the truth is, somebody's taking the lion's share of income from the creative, forces behind music, and it's not those creators.
Right.
And I think Sona is probably one of the main tools we have to you know, change that.
I think it says a lot about the economic structure period when you have to be a brilliant marketer, like a brilliant social media influencer, as well as a brilliant songwriter and a brilliant performer and artist at the same time to have a modicum of success today. We look at, a great longtime friend of mine, Victoria Monet.
Mm-hmm.
Watching her success on the world stage is so amazing and inspiring and humbling. But I know and have seen that woman be all those things to get to this
Right.
point that she's at. And I don't think that's fair to songwriters and artists, period. That you have to be a multi hyphenate for so long just to be able to say, hey, I'm here, And I think, the work that SONA is doing enough advocacy work for the earnings part of that. But I think there's a larger conversation about how do we change a business that makes it very difficult to succeed in a ever-changing landscape. I think my personal opinion, though, is I think AI is going to make the great stand out even more, right? Is because once it becomes democratic and everybody can do it, right? Everybody can do it. The ones who can do it will still stand out, and that's my hope.
That's right. That's right. I'd like to think that will never change because humanity is humanity. There's not, I mean, we are unique creatures, and as long as we can sustain, literally being able to afford to do it. That's the problem. It's like if you have to be able to make a living at it, or we go the way of, say, sculptors who rely on grants to be able to do what they do.
I mean, your wife, you said she's an independent filmmaker.
Right.
I don't know if you just saw the latest AI thing that came out where you can do text to video.
I did see that.
It is astounding.
It's astounding.
You look at it, you're like, oh,
I mean, I feel like thousands of people just lost their jobs.
Oh yeah. Yeah, hundreds
of thousands. Which is hundreds
of thousands,
which is not right, and it'll happen to us. It'll happen to us if we're not vigilant.
But the one thing that I'll say, it's not all doom and gloom. Think about this, and I know you've been around long enough to know this change is when it went from, hey, we can only record 4 tracks to now we got 64 unique, things in Pro Tools to now unlimited, on your phone,
Right.
I think we're in a time where if you know how to take advantage of these resources, they can be an infinite source of creativity. I just think the way that we're going to consume everything is going to shift. We're not going to consume the music and movies the same way that we have. It's just not going to be able to be possible, right? It's going to be too easy to be able to create. So what's going to separate the real high level of creativity, I think, is going to be the methods by which we consume the products. And we'll see what that turns into. We got some YouTube questions, man.
We do? Okay.
Yeah, we got one specific one that says, how do you feel about collaborative sites like BeatStars or Baton, sites where you can buy tracks to write to? How do you feel about that?
Well, I'm probably the wrong person to ask that question. I think you might be the better person to answer that question.
I know about BeatStars. I don't know about Baton. BeatStars is cool, man. Like, it's created an economy for producers. And there's this huge article on Billboard about how there's this famous artist, somebody I know personally. I'm kind of too close to this to talk about it in too much detail, but huge Billboard article from a big producer who's been nominated for several Grammys, who's a household name, and these producers are not getting paid on the project. And I have direct knowledge of situations going on there. So when you have a site like BeatStars, and BeatStars isn't the first of its kind. There's been so many. I remember when I was in college, and there's a website where you could upload, I forget, it was like a precursor to SoundClick. I don't remember the name of it. I should, but they had a ranking, and everybody was selling their beats for like
Mm.
$100, 500, and if you're the best, like 2,500 and 5,000, whatever. That was a lot of money back then, but it allowed a creative economy. And so, what I would say to your question, Sumi Display, I think that's your name, anywhere where creatives can have an opportunity to monetize themselves direct to consumer is a great thing, right? Because for so long, you have five people with their hands out in between the creative and a consumer. And a lot of times, especially nowadays as producers, you're not getting paid sometimes ever if you have an album cut. You know, you're hoping to see your money in streams and share in the copyright. And often you're not getting that money. And if you have a single and you have a great team, you'll see some good money, but it's not the days of producers surviving just like songwriters off just advances is pretty much over. So anywhere there's collaboration and the artists are taking care of each other, and by artists I also mean the producers. I love it. I'm not super familiar with Baton, but I like the idea that there is e-commerce between creatives. And so we got just a short amount of time, Stephen, and I want to get I got some rapid fire questions for you
Oh, okay.
that I've been instructed to levy your praise. So, quickly, what song do you wish you wrote?
Ah, well, I'm going to go way back to Sugar Sugar by the Archies, which is to me the perfect pop song. I don't know if you know. I don't know. You may not be old enough to know that song.
Don't know this
Um,
off the top of my head.
more recently, I love the Billie Eilish song from Barbie. I love that song, and that's the kind of song I hear and I go, oh, it's so beautifully simple, and and then in the middle of that is Vogue. Like I'm so jealous that I didn't get to write Vogue with Madonna. Shep Pettibone, the amazing Shep Pettibone, wrote that, and so those are a couple that come to mind immediately.
Yeah, so quick shameless plug. My partner and I got to do the orchestration and arrangement for the nominees this year for the Grammys.
Oh, nice.
I mean, it was string arrangements. And see, when I tell you, we did all these string arrangements, just string quartet. And when that Billie Eilish song came on, every single time, just melody. That song is
So it's so gorgeous. It's that talking about melodies. It's like she starts on the seventh. She starts on the major
oh yeah.
seventh.
Da, 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 da. Oh my God. And lyrically, okay, enough fanboy.
Right, right.
Who is your favorite songwriter?
Well, I had a feeling you were going to ask me that. So I got to go back to the Motown, Holland Dozier Holland. You know, going back to that. But
Yes.
then that transgresses that kind of that moves in along with me as I age to people like I mentioned, Todd Rundgren, Joni Mitchell. I was like in the same way that you were introduced to Dylan, I was introduced to Joni Mitchell in
Mm.
the mid '70s, and I've never turned back. I think she's one of the best ever. Jimmy Webb, you
Mm.
know, Jimmy Webb, who wrote those anthems like By the Time I Get to Phoenix and Wichita Lineman, which has one of the greatest bridges of all time when he says, "And I need you more than want you, and I want you for all time."
Hmm.
It's just. So those are some favorites. I have lots of favorites.
Who is your dream co-write?
Ah, I'm lucky enough that I've had my dream co-writes. Brenda and Allie, to
Hmm?
be able to work with them for 5, 6 years straight, and then Madonna, for 10 years. I don't I would be it would be wrong for me to dream, you know, beyond that.
That's beautiful. Okay. What are three of your writing in studio must-haves?
Oh, I'm a big fan of I like I do like my laptop. I gotta have my laptop, but I also like a whiteboard, for lyrics. I like a whiteboard because I want everybody in the room. Like, 'cause I usually like collaborate. So there's two of us or three of us, and it just feels good to like write big giant lyrics on the wall and have somebody go. You can, I don't know, just something tangible about looking at it and seeing that looks great. Those words look good together. And other than that, just definitely got to have a Wurlitzer or some cool old keyboard in the room or a guitar to pick up. So that was four things.
Do you have a favorite quote?
Oh, my favorite quote is, and I think Duke Ellington said this: "If it sounds good, it is good."
Hmm. Hmm. What is one of your current music-based goals?
To finish the musical, musicals take so long to finish, and so to finish the musical I'm working on right now.
Oh, that's definitely exciting, man. So we're just about to our hour. We got
Wow,
we
that went fast. It's great talking to you.
did it did. We got a few minutes just to shoot our our shots off.
We can talk about cassette hiss.
But I think one things I wanted to ask you, spanning your time in the business, not just on the music side, on the film side, how would you say when a song is done?
Oh, I'm a little bit neurotic to answer that question
Good.
because I'm the one that's like, I hear it on the radio and I'm like, oh, why
Yep.
didn't we why did we mix that like that? Or, is that really was that the best lyric we could come up with? So I'm never satisfied. I'm never satisfied. It could always be better, which is why it's great for me to collaborate with people like Madonna who say, we're done, you know. I don't know. Because I'm the one that's always like, well, I think it can be better.
I 100% agree. One of my favorite quotes is the best songs are rewritten, you know?
That's
Uh,
right. And that's very true for musicals. They say you don't write musicals, you rewrite musicals.
I would love to know that process. I know we don't have enough time to talk about it, but I would love to know that process of writing musicals. One other question. How would you say, or what do you see positively um technology affecting the musical landscape in the next 5 to 10 years?
Technology like AI we're talking about, or
Ever technology you want to say, but obviously technology AI.
well, I think that relates back to what you said a few moments ago. It's going to become easier and easier and easier to create music.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I know your question is about technology, but well, I think the technology that's up here is what we need to focus on because it's already amazing what you can do compared to what we're talking about with those cassette machines. It's to me, like I use Pro Tools more than anything else. It's miraculous what you can do in a computer these days. And I think we need to focus just as much though on what are we saying? What are we trying to say? Are we just filling the space from between the beginning of the song and the end of the song with stuff that's pleasant to hear, or are we going to start doing music that speaks to things that are going on in the world? The technology of our creativity, I think, is what needs to be focused on because I think we're making a lot of great sounding music, but I don't know how much we're saying. I'm just as guilty as anybody else of being like on the boat of like, let's be hooky and let's be catchy and let's be dancey, right? But I think we also have to be meaningful, and there's not enough of that.
Hmm.
I don't
Last
know if that was an answer. I don't know if that was an answer.
last question. What advice would you give the 2024 version of you? Learning to drum, wanting to becoming a producer, what advice would you give yourself if you were at your musical adolescence right now?
I would say most important thing is you want to be able to be proficient at the technology that we've just talked about. But more important than that is you got to learn how to listen to people and be that person in the room that's a supporter, because I think it's all about supporting one another in the creative endeavor. If you're speaking about collaboration, it's about being of service to the people in the room with you.
Hmm.
Learn how to do that.
That was amazing. That was amazing. Jot down the notes now. Well, thank you for being here, man.
It's
I
a
really
pleasure.
appreciate it. I wish we had longer. But to everybody watching, the replay will be available on the SONA YouTube channel. I believe Suzanne has placed the link in the chat, along with our website and all socials. If you're not already a member, consider joining us. We'd love to have you. Remember, you don't have to be a songwriter to be a member. Any final thoughts from you to our audience?
Join Sona so we get stronger and we grow stronger together.
There you have it. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
All righty.